There we go. Over to you, Zulu.
Hi, well, I'm Zuleika Gerrish. I am a fully qualified diamond and gemstone grader, but I also like to put myself as more as a jewelry historian because my background's more was in the arts, and I've always been fascinated with the Georgians, especially. And so when you put jewelry, which is basically miniature artworks, the back tells you as much as the front, but I find with paintings, they are the real giveaways. And why I mention this is so interesting because we're about to go into look at films and how they portray a period drama of how things should be seen. And with art, that was actually correctly painted at the time as what we call a period eye, which means you see things at the time of the time rather than 50, 100 years or sometimes 200 years later. So yeah, that's me. And so I will try and add some historically interesting points into this slides.
No, I'm sure you'll bring your expertise and expert eye, and for I come from the design, the making, and the more contemporary angle, so you will be you'll be the brains of the presentation. Well, welcome everyone. I just keep clicking for you as people pop up in the waiting room. So yes, it's Diamonds at Downton. So although for those of you who've seen my post, I am a big Downton fan, and Zuleika actually was in London earlier this week. And if you go to her Instagram, antique jewelry historian, you can see her actually wearing some of the Downton pieces, the original pieces from Bentley and Skinner. So she's looking fabulous in some of the original tiaras. So do have a look if you want to see Zuleika sporting some of them herself. But we are going to then kind of do a quick kind of overview of the eras. And so in that context, we're going to look at iconic eras. And this is where kind of obviously Zuleika's kind of expertise can guide us through kind of the key things that define an era. And obviously we'll kind of look at some of the pieces, yes, from Downton, but also we're going to look at a couple from The Crown, obviously then The Great Gatsby, and then we're going to move into some more individual pieces, famous jewels, and also kind of moving into more kind of contemporary references in the sort of in film that some of you may be, well, I imagine a lot of people will be familiar with. So, speaking of Zuleika's passion for all things Georgian, starting off with the Georgian era. So yeah, we naturally that is where we kind of kick off with the Downton tiara afterwards. But Zuli, what for kind of highlighted here, just kind of your key takeaways on the kind of Georgian jewelry. What do you look for?
Normally you find the sort of fallback, so tend to be fallback. The materials is always really interesting. Always silver. You will never, ever, ever, ever see platinum. So that's a major thing. So it will be silver. So they will they loved using a sort of almost slightly low grade silver then. It's kind of 800 grams. So it does tend to go kind of blackish much earlier rather than what we have now, which is a sort of 925, which is slightly higher silver. They also, yeah, so foil back materials is always a slight giveaway because to find a diamond, Georgian diamond, is exceptionally rare. I mean, it really is. I mean, to give you contents of diamonds, you're talking about where did they mine them? And that's why Georgian era is so interesting because prior to, I mean, Georgian era here is 1714, but basically prior to that, diamonds only came from a form of secondary source, which was in India. So everything came from India. They only had a certain amount of diamonds and they were exceptionally rare. And then Brazil got discovered, again, another secondary source, which basically secondary source means finding diamonds in the riverbeds as opposed to finding a pipeline, which is what happened in not until about 1860, which is in Africa, when they found the kimberlite mine. So suddenly loads of diamonds, which is why in the Victorian era gets very, very exciting with diamonds. But that's why Georgian era is so exceptionally rare to find anything diamonds. And so they used other materials to mimic diamonds. So you will have things like paste, which is cut glass. You have rock crystal was also used. They loved a gemstone from Portugal at the time, which is chrysoprase. It kind of like chrysoprase. It's kind of like a really pretty yellowy tinted gemstone. They absolutely loved it at that time. Cut steel was another one because it looks like rose cuts but gives the shimmer. But you've also got to think of the contents of light. So back then they didn't have electricity. So, you know, when you were invited to a ball, it was literally candlelight. So you've got to imagine how these things shimmer. And they would do anything to make it look like they were wearing a diamond. So often paste, being foil back, will have the back of a foil will have maybe a little black dot to give the illusion it was an old minecart or something. So it's really fun. It's all giving that sort of the original costume jewelry basically, and it was everything to give that the look, and they're beautifully made and very flat. I mean, everything just handmade. And also, you got to remember, even the materials like gold was so expensive. So even things like a ring, it's not uncommon for it to be maybe 15 carats at the top, and then the band at the back to be like 9 carat, and maybe even where your ring sizing bit right at the back bit might even be a form of very low graded gold at that point. So testing the gold of anything gold and Georgian era is quite difficult to be like it's definitely 100% because they did use different materials. So yeah.
That's so interesting, and it's so interesting to see how obviously inventive they would have to be, both on material usage. Obviously, though, speaking of expensive gold, I mean, you know, we feel that nowadays as well. We've come back full circle. That's and obviously, I mean, it's really interesting to see what you kind of as we move into the Victorian era and then the Edwardian era, where we see such this influx of diamonds. But then because we did promise a little bit of some historical jewels, bit of Downton. So what was interesting as well, and the reason in the first few we've looked at, I've put in the slides very much of focusing around tiaras, because, and Zuleika, you were also talking about tiaras being such a kind of key social status when we were kind of talking about tiaras. And this one actually, for those of you who did or have seen the early seasons of Downton, the Crawley tiara, which it was kind of called that, as it was the tiara that would have been the family tiara that would have been worn by the key women in the family when getting married. So it's then actually seen twice as both Lady Mary and then subsequently Lady Edith wear it. Although, as you can see in the rather distraught image where Lady Edith was stood up at the altar, the real Bentley and Skinner tiara, which is worth, I think, somewhere between 100 and 200,000 pounds, obviously was not flung on the floor. So there was a somewhat lower priced prop double. But just in terms of then the kind of the context of status and wearing tiaras, obviously you were talking about that being very much a kind of key indicator of societal kind of status during these eras, kind of Georgian, Victorian, Edwardian, etc. So.
Yeah, it's a beautiful tiara. I mean, I would date it probably about 1820s. So it's about, yeah, it's a Regency, maybe a little bit early, but I'm going 1820s. They're always very hard to date, but you can slightly give away with how the metal work is made. So it's yeah, it's beautiful, really beautiful, and exceptionally rare. I mean, like I said about diamonds, Georgian diamonds tiara, which is always the masterpiece, it's just amazing. And for them to survive, you know, 200 and well, we're now 250, no, yeah, 220 years since 1800s. It's just amazing to think how a tiara will survive to today, because so many have broken up, which is really sad. But also a lot of them are, even the Georgian ones, they would maybe be a brooch, a necklace. I mean, it's insane what they would be. And the Georgian ones are a lot heavier than what we're about to go into, the Edwardian eras.
The other thing as well, speaking about the kind of the rarity of the diamonds, you were saying like so for a family for albeit fictionally, for a family to in a Georgian period to have their family tiara being all diamond would that be kind of securing their status at a certain point in kind of the aristocracy, or is that something that would be kind of relative if they had a tiara, it would expect it to be diamond?
So tiaras are a whole status symbol. So the first time you get to wear a tiara as a woman is on your wedding day. You are not meant to be seen wearing a tiara before that. It's kind of a fun way to see who's single. You know, you go to a ball, see the ladies without a tiara, and you know you're single, because you know even when they're presented to court it would be a feather or something. They would never wear a tiara, and so it was very much a status symbol to show that you've moved from basically being a guest to a form of hostess basically, and yeah, it gives you a true status that you have that piece, and people would know and recognize the different tiaras, and so yeah.
Amazing. So moving on to, got the Victorians. They got very and not necessarily in a bad way. They got very sentimental in the Victorian era, didn't they? Across their jewelry. So in terms of their symbolism and I don't know if was that started by kind of Queen Victoria herself and the kind of her great love affair with Albert, or was that kind
No,
of
no, Victorians have always Georgians kind of started it actually, and they have. You know, we forget that we're talking about diamonds here, but we are missing one of the key elements that they absolutely adored, which is any form of natural gemstones. So you're talking, you know, turquoise, coral, pearls. You know, they really, really tried to use that, including cameos is massive in that era. So when you're talking about symbolisms, the Victorians got quite obsessed with it. Is not from Queen Victoria. I think they just love the meanings of everything. So even if you ever go to a graveyard, which is a kind of completely off topic, but it's all there, which is in a graveyard, you'll have things like ivy maybe put on the thing, and it's the same symbolism on the gravestone as it is in jewelry. So ivy literally means I cling to thee, and I think it's such a romantic meaning. They were so loved, all that sort of thing. So we've got swallows here, so swallow means bring back my love, and so that might be given to someone. You've got to remember men work quite often went to war, so they would go away for months and months and then maybe years, and so the idea that they might give their loved ones a swallow knowing that they'll be coming back. So it's kind of a really sweet one, because swallows, yeah, it's the whole thing of like what they mean. So swallows always do return to they mate for life basically. So and Victorians started to understand that. So the symbolism starts sweeping in there.
Amazing. And then moving on to kind of staying with the kind of tiaras, but kind of going royal here. When obviously we were talking before, talking about kind of the how obviously tiaras have then kind of gone through different generational iterations, even particularly obviously in the royal family. So kind of referring to the crown here, which has kind of been a great source of kind of inspiration in terms of looking at different imagery. But fun enough, actually, one thing I did think of it after we last spoke was obviously Downton have used a combination of both real and prop pieces. The Great Gatsby, which we'll come to, pretty much used exclusively fine jewelry pieces in partnership with Tiffany's. But the Crown, pretty much they used no. I think they pretty much you were using all replicas and costume jewelry, if that's correct. So there was no loaning in of kind of the original pieces. Well, not that you would loan in the Crown jewels, but there was no partnering or kind of involvement of fight. They were literally all just staged pieces, which is kind of an interesting take given how iconic they were.
Yeah, I think the most famous costume designer for jewelry is someone called Andrew Prince, and he did do the Downton Abbey original film one. And there's always slight giveaways, apart from obviously it's when the camera zooms in, it looks a bit, you know, but it's giving the illusion, it's telling the story. I mean, with the crown, it's quite. I haven't watched most of it because I can't bear it. It's too historically incorrect for me. It's like fabricated, it's like Hollywood version. And then you find when you speak to someone in America, they end up hating Queen Victoria, Elizabeth, so Queen Elizabeth or something. And I'm like, no,
Not a
history is just
documentary.
you know. So yeah, it's not factual. It's based on elements of facts, but it's not completely, but it has got bits. And so
And they follow suit with how they represented the jewelry. Although the one I've got here, the fringe, and funny again, we did touch on it before when we were chatting, like with Queen Mary. The so Queen Mary was the person who created the fringe, and actually, for those of you who might have seen our Instagram, another one that we had shared in our Instagram posts about this talk was the Lover's Knot tiara, which again the replica of the one we now know and see on sort of the current Princess of Wales was created by Queen Mary again. So she seems to be the originator of quite a few kind of tiaras that have gone through into the contemporary royal family. But this one particularly seems to be a royal favourite, as we kind of see it does kind of come through. But it was worn, and the real, if you've seen here, worn on the the Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth's wedding day, and it actually broke whilst being fitted. So the original makers, Garrard, had to actually then do a bit of a fast repair to make so she could get to Westminster Abbey on time. So it goes to show, and actually speaking of Zulu's Instagram, if you do pop over to her Instagram, it still happens to this day. And Queen Camilla was seen out wearing a brooch with a missing pearl. So to this day, pieces when we talk about things not being indestructible, it even happens to the royals. So I thought that was quite a little an interesting one to note. But again, you can see here again as Zulu mentioned when we'd previously spoken about the kind of the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara, that it has been seen, and it's quite rare to see a particular tiara from what you were saying. I'll let you kind of highlight this, be seen at such kind of regular intervals. Obviously, we see some pop up every now and again at a royal wedding or somewhere or some key event or a coronation. But in terms of actually seeing a particular tiara with regularity across generations, that does seem to be a little bit more unusual. And so this one, I wanted to bring this one in because this one again seems to be from Queen Mary, who seemed to be quite quite the eye for tiaras, has been seen right up to most recently Princess Beatrice at her wedding.
yeah, the royal jewelry is rather interesting because you've got to remember the part of the reason why so many items of jewelry had to be made, if I get my facts right, which is Georgian era, there was a lot of things had to be given away because jewelry is a personal thing, but there are also some that belong to the state. So it's kind of like those that are personal end up, with death duties and things have to be passed. And like Queen Victoria gave a lot of her jewelry away upon her death and everything and throughout her life. So that's why there were certain things like you find that in the V&A, they've now got the sapphire cornet, one that she actually wore at the back there.
Yep.
So they've got that, and that was given by Prince Albert. And there's various bits like that. So by the time Queen Mary came onto the throne, even though of course Queen Alexandra before that had like literally she was just like arm of jewels.
A walking diamond.
A lot were given away, and so it's not there wasn't actually as much jewelry as we like to think was readily available. And so, yeah, Queen Mary had quite a lot made because, of course, it was society at the time. They did need to be seen wearing state, tiaras and everything and follow the fashion, which was at that time peak tiara in about 1920.
No, it's quite the stunner, especially even after the repair job. And speaking of tiaras, this particular one I thought was an interesting one, although not seen in our kind of our on screen. It was on coins, so kind of a bit of a sidestep. So just another iconic one, which again featuring Queen Mary, who seems to pop up everywhere. She was the one who was seemed to be originating this with, as it's known, the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland, which was commissioned for Queen Mary and then given to Princess Elizabeth. So moving on to the next era, the Belle Epoque, and this is one I was asking you about, Zulu, that because we're this kind of moving swiftly, kind of in tandem onto then the Edwardians. For me, I really as from a layman's eye, although as a designer, I would be hard pressed to see the difference. So it'd be really kind of seeing kind of the Belle Epoque and then the Edwardians kind of in quick succession. It seems to be a lot of similar inspirations, but yeah, your expertise is needed here.
Yeah, no, they are very, very similar to a lot of point of views. I think more Belle Epoque is French. As for when we say Edwardian, or as my granny would say, Edwardian. But that was very much a is kind of the difference between English and French. And so the English was commonly like 18 karat gold, and then you have platinum at the top, sometimes 15 karat, but usually about that. As for French, it's very interesting because they never use a carat of gold lower than 18 karat gold. So it would always be 18 karat gold or platinum. And platinum came at the end of to be safe, always say 1900s. So if you see platinum pieces, it's about 1900, but they did exist before, say 1890. You do see the odd piece, but it would be used predominantly only at the top rather than being a solid platinum piece. But Belle Epoque is exactly that. It's the beautiful era. It's very it's all about the style. So nothing is straight. It's always like flowing. It's pretty. It's all about the swags. It's incredibly beautiful. So you get lots of bows and prettiness and little flowers and little details and things move. It's I always love all the whole when you get I am
We're
absolutely
into your era here, aren't we?
no, I just love French jewelry, and the Belle Epoque era is my absolute favorite era. I think it's so the way it's made is so fine. It's all the details, and they often have, which they haven't got an example here because we've got the bits that are floating, but they often also had the French did very clever settings of metal the back or in front of a diamond, and it gives the illusion that the diamond's even bigger. So they're just very, very clever with the setting, but it's no straight lines. It's all just very, very fine. So when you see that sort of Belle Epoque 1900 era around then, it's all very fine. It's all very, very pretty. And so that gives it away. It's for Edwardian is that it's very low setting. They're both low settings and things. It's just a little bit more straightness, being a bit more English. We're not as finely made as the French, but very, very similar.
It's been, and I'm coming from a goldsmith's eye. I always look at kind of old, like the more historical pieces, and go without the kind of the ease of the contemporary tooling that we have now, and the precision of contemporary tooling. It blows my mind how they were able to make such elegant, precise, and delicate pieces that to this day have lasted. When you get pieces that are made with modern kind of tooling that don't last more than a couple of years. So it's quite, it really is quite, they're stunning. And then speaking of, so a beautiful example, obviously the tiara, which this is the one that Zulu it can be seen sporting on her Instagram, which
Yeah, I wore it. It's surprisingly light, which is what it should be. So diamonds back then, it was all that's the other thing, big key detail. So the whole thing about Edwardian jewelry and Belle Epoque, exactly the same. It's more gemstone than metal. You're not meant to see any metal. So the whole purpose of platinum, the reason they used it was it gave the illusion of diamonds being part of the diamond rather than the setting. So when you look at that tiara, that's a classic example. All you see is just beautiful diamonds in a beautiful shape. You don't see the metal. And so the back will also be the other giveaway because the goldsmiths at the time, they would hire very young apprentice boys, usually anything between age 8 to 12. And one of their sole jobs was literally just polishing the backs. So there'll be the back will be so smooth and beautifully finished. And so the back of the jewel is just as good as the front. And that's why I always find so fascinating when you see these pieces, because there's not evidence of little bits of metal work or piercing and coming. You won't see that. That will not be from that era, because especially the French houses who were so big on details, that's, yeah, they were very proud of their jewels. And especially
those poor 8-year-old boys.
But then they grow into becoming the working in, yeah.
And then moving on to kind of, as I said, it's kind of much of this kind of similar into the Edwardian era, but this is where obviously you were saying with more of the English influences or the British influences at this point. So, but again, very similar-esque kind of. Vibe feels a very kind of poor description of it, but we're saying kind of between the Belle Epoque and the Edwardian, we're seeing very similar kind of inspirations.
Yes, you are, but you will see with the English ones, they're a bit more, there's a sort of form of straightness, which is mean like that brooch is a giveaway. Everything's a bit more, like regimental in some form of element. And it's just the design. It's a beautiful design. It's classic Edwardian, but it's not Belle Epoque because it's not got that prettier, swaggy sort of bow-like details. And that's the element.
And then, so speaking of this stunner of a brooch, again, did you see this one when you were at Bentley and Skinner?
Yes, I did, and I am obsessed with pink topaz. So I really wanted it, but it is a lot of money. So as much as I really wanted that, I'm afraid my card would be massively declined on that one.
Still a kidney. That's what they're there for.
But again, it's so classic Edwardian. You've got those beautiful little flowers. You've got the details, and the metal. It's so pretty. It's really beautiful. It's quite big. It's about that big. So. Yeah,
that was what I found quite interesting, because actually when I saw the original product image that I've put here, actually then seeing it in situ actually on obviously the character Lady Cora, when it's what she's wearing, it's much more sizable than I was expecting. And actually this one is from the most recent film, where actually Bentley and Skinner's collaboration, I think to my it's the largest number of pieces that they have loaned for any of the Downton movies to date. I think it's 13 pieces. So it was the greatest number of pieces that so I dread to think what their insurance was, but it's an absolute stunner.
Yeah, well, they do Bentley and Skinner do a loan thing. So if you want to get married in a tiara, you can wear a tiara and things.
Really?
From Bentley and they're
getting married. There you go.
Their exhibition is on until the 31st of October.
Oh, perfect. So anyone who's in London, and that's down in Bond Street, is that right?
Yeah, Bond Street.
Perfect. So anyone in London, pop over to Bond Street and you'll be able to see these in person. Now, interestingly, the next era, Art Nouveau era, so Zuleika and I were talking about this, we could not find in any mainstream films, movies. I'm sure it's going to pop up somewhere, but we could not find really good representation of Art Nouveau jewellery in anything on screen. And just again with that bit of a kind of a kind of an educated guess, but
it's fascinating because like when you go to places, I don't know if anyone's been to places like Prague or Prague is just, the Art Nouveau there is insane. The buildings, the architecture, the jewelry, France was the same, but it's you don't see so much because of course we've been in World War II, which did bomb a huge amount of buildings. But there are still the bit of elements. We've still got a bit in London as well. But the design, it's all about the design, and picadure, which is the glass element, which you sort of see as sort of in these pictures. It's sort of that greenish bits, but it's basically a bit of like enamel glass in each wing, and it's just so beautiful. And you get certain ones. There's an amazing collection in Norwich of the Sainsbury's centre, and they've got some amazing pieces. But literally, they're things like butterflies, dragonflies, and they shimmer when you move, so they're very, very delicate but beautiful. And they're, I think, as someone who loves jewelry, I don't know if I could wear one because I think they're so beautiful. But as a historian, the craftsmanship, you've just got to admire it. It's absolutely like a whole nother level. Like, how do you put heat with a gemstone, and yet I don't even know, like the carving, it's so highly skilled. I wouldn't even know where you begin.
Well, it's interesting because I think you kind of also hit the nail on the head there. It's almost it's art that happens to be able to be worn. So maybe that's also why it's not seen in the same way as we see the more diamond heavy pieces, because obviously the Art Nouveau era was so very much in the kind of focusing on the enamel, which maybe just doesn't translate on screen in the same way. But like you, it's an era I'm obsessed with and have long been inspired by. But having worked in enamel for a period of my career, it is a complexity of kind of science meets art that is unlike any other part of kind of any kind of jewelry techniques, and I find it fascinating. And actually, you can't unless it's obviously one of you sort of a diamond. Actually, you have to do your enameling separately and then cold join your elements, because you can't actually apply heat to enamel once it's been fired, because you can or further fire it. So a lot of the kind of cold join, a lot of the diamonds are then set after the enamel. So it's yeah, I mean the craftsmanship is off the chart. But it was
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, I was going to say one thing that needs to be mentioned is, of course, today we have laser. So laser can save a whole load of jobs. But back then they didn't have that. Even like the way they cut gemstones, there was no laser. Everything was done by hand. So, you're talking about even diamonds was cleaving. So it's a form of literally a hammer with a cleave. So a sharp tool that way, that's cleaving. And then eventually they got into swording. So there was a form of a tool which a bit more element. But then when you were talking about laser, it's just absolutely just amazing. And actually, one element one should mention is before we go into Art Deco, because there is one house that gets very sadly closes down around this time, which is Fabergé. And it's because partly to do with the way history changed, but in the case of Fabergé, what changed was the fact that the Russian Revolution was the final finish for it. And of course the First World War, which is two wars. But also I don't think it would have survived, because when we're going into Art Deco, the enamel fashion completely changed. Nobody wanted the enameled things as much as they did. So what I'm trying to say is Cartier managed to follow through with it, with the amazing diamonds and for tiaras and things, and people wanted to keep wearing it. As for Fabergé, which had completely mastered how to do enamel on an egg, the whole point is enamel needs to be flat in order to go in and get that perfect thickness. So how do you do it on an egg? And that's why they were the best. And so, yeah, it's
And also
amazing when you think of it like
with
that.
with the engraving underneath it as well. So again, we think about like engraving nowadays using kind of air compressed tools, which you can get a level of precision that is how you see some extraordinary engraving. But then to see that engraving again, completely hand done underneath that enamel work that Fabergé was so famous for, the craftsmanship again just was, it makes your mind kind of reel. But as you say, the brands and how jewelry houses had to move with the times, or they didn't survive.
Yeah, there's one little side note which I always love. I think is so funny is that when Cartier moved to Bond Street they were two doors down from Fabergé, and Fabergé was always known because of the Russian royal family and being cousins with King George. It was kind of like generally had the royal approval and everyone knew it, and they had their by appointment was inside. It was all very subtle. As for Cartier, they were very proud of having the by appointment. It was very loud. It was out there. It was that we have got royal appointment. So it's I always find it so funny and it's fascinating. There's a brilliant book you can read by I always forget her name, Francesca. She's the great granddaughter of Louis Cartier, and absolutely fascinating read. And yeah, so highly recommend, because it's fascinating how even though they were the greatest, jewelry houses in the world, they still were expected to use trade entrance, going to events and things, which I just think is mind blowing.
Also, go show Cartier always being great at marketing.
Yeah,
And,
they're
and,
very
and to this day. So you touched on that. So moving on to the Art Deco period, which we are spoilt for choice in terms of both reference images, in terms of sort of film references. So I've used a couple for in both Downton, and then we'll kind of touch on the Great Gatsby, which is pretty much kind of all Art Deco, but it remains to this day possibly one of the most kind of popular eras. But again, I'll kind of sort of soon ask for your kind of expertise, but in itself, it drew on so much, as I said, right back to kind of sort of Egyptian inspirations through to, so it's quite an interesting era of design because it in itself drew on so much.
I think it's from the fact that finally they were starting to explore the world more, because it's kind of in time with the aeroplane as well. So it's all about movement and exploring, and so bringing back design on a much farther extent. So now we've moved away from the prettiness into more geometrical, everything in shapes. Which, funny enough, it was the Germans who did it so well, and they were kind of the leading for Art Deco design.
The that kind of cleanliness of design, that's absolutely, it's stunning. But as you say, in such short succession from Edwardian to Art Deco, we go very quickly from fluidity to these really kind of distinctive lines, and then some key pieces going back to our kind of on screen. So obviously, Lady wore this one again in the most recent film. Which was this one of the other ones you saw at Bentley and Skinner? Was this another piece on display?
Yeah, yeah, they're all there. So
Um,
definitely go and have a look. And there's some red stickers already. So if you want to buy, you better buy soon.
Oh, would that we could. And then what I thought was interesting, again, this one that they use for in Lady Mary, the styling of this seemed, because it was the positioning, and again very interesting. But things start to get that much, I don't want to say risque, but definitely kind of took on a different dimension compared to not that much, sort of not that far kind of previous in the Edwardian era, to kind of be moving into this type of styling again without kind of referencing the authenticity of the actual costumes. But interesting to see the styling of the jewelry.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much the time it was, but also it's the time one's got to remember historically how, as a woman, you could just start wearing trousers and cocktail rings, which was all about that. It was kind of came from America, that element, because it was all about, hence the cocktail term, because it was all about not being able to drink. I've forgotten what they call it in America now, when they couldn't drink with the ban, hence the Great Gatsby. But the whole point is, it was they by having while holding a drink, you have an amazing ring on, and it's kind of an idea that a woman could wear a ring that wasn't just their engagement ring. And so that was the start of amazing, unique designs. And I think it followed into the fashion. I don't follow fashion in terms of clothes that closely, so I wouldn't be like that's historically completely correct. But I do know at the time it was getting quite daring, and so that is completely correct to wear a clip at the back of the dress, in
Well,
that sense.
at least they got the clip
Because
right, because
why not?
as you've said, they got the tiara styling completely wrong.
Yeah, the I was mentioning this. So the tiara, technically you could be give away a bit of it, which is there was no correct way to wear a tiara in the 1920s, because they wore it like here, like a bando, to wherever, But the problem I have is that it's a little bit far back, in all the film. They're just sitting at the back. And if I do this, you can sort of see me with it's too far back. You can see, but if I put it here, you see visually suddenly everything looks better. Because the whole idea of you've got to think of your eyes as being the sort of middle of your face. And I was always told by Andrew Prince that you were meant to put your thumb under your chin to your finger to the nose, and you've got to sit up straight to do it. And the whole idea that that perfect distance is where your tiara is meant to be worn. But actually, what it really is about the visualness of being a total, halfway point. And so the tiara is meant to sit literally probably about an inch, no more than an inch, away from your front. I mean, I got it wrong on my wedding day. So, it's very easy. It's because when a hairdresser is doing the back of your hair, they're looking at the back and they're trying to get it sewn in. And it does need to be sewn in because otherwise the tiara ends up sitting a bit more like a headband rather than needs to sit up. And they are light to a point, but they've still got heaviness in design. So they do need to there's little loops at the back which need to sit. So they end up sitting on your head rather than you wearing the tiara, if that makes sense. And they have a little metal band at the bottom, which is normally meant to have a ribbon on, which matches your hair color. So if you're blonde, you will have a sort of very sort of blonde-like one. And then if you've got dark hair, you will have a dark version or a black version. And the same goes to if you've got ginger hair, it's the same thing, red hair. So you've got, it will always match whatever your hair is. And then, it's meant to sit front and it's meant to be sewn in. So this is the point with the whole thing of which I get told in the film about, the tiara being ripped off and everything. I'm just like, back then it would have been so painful.
You would have had a bald patch.
It would have been sewn, and there's a wonderful program with the Swedish queen talking about her tiara having it sewn in because she has a hairdresser who does it. And I just think, it's so heavy and it gives you headaches. And when your hair's got all these clips in, it's a very heavy thing to do, which is why our late queen stopped wearing a tiara towards the end of her life because it was too heavy. There's only so much you can do.
Those neck muscles start to kind of take a bit of a so then keeping on then just on the Art Deco train, could not ignore The Great Gatsby, which at the time that it came out was an interesting, and when we were talking about it, for me, it kind of was an interesting kind of cycle of the kind of life meeting arts meeting life, because Tiffany's worked with the sort of the team to be able to actually create the collection, and the collection which then featured throughout the film was then back in store and then became part of the kind of the Tiffany showcase. So again, it kind of was available. But it was interesting actually, the author themselves was a client of Tiffany's. So again, this interweaving, particularly with the historical brands such as Cartier, Tiffany's, when they then work with contemporary productions and they're able to either create or loan pieces, it's really interesting to see that they were the ones who originally made the pieces of that era anyway. So it's really interesting to see how this comes by. And I couldn't help myself, obviously being a gouache artist, I couldn't help but throw in a few of the illustrations, also to show how contemporary relevant they are even to this day. And Tiffany's and many of the high jewelry houses do still use them. But I thought it's very interesting to see how obviously they worked with Baz Luhrmann to create an entire collection that was both in store and in film. So it's kind of like, speaking of marketing, great marketing.
Yeah, they're amazing at marketing, and they've done some great, fantastic exhibitions to revive their historic history. I think they're amazing, Tiffany.
So we covered kind of a lot of the historical stuff as expected, got dug a little deeper. So what we're going to do, just to kind of do a bit of a quick fire of some more contemporary pieces, well, and a few more vintage ones that are moving beyond our kind of our big three that we've looked at, which are Downton, kind of The Crown, and The Great Gatsby, and just look at kind of the importance of jewelry in film throughout history, and kind of some of the just little stories behind it. So a bit more of a quick fire round, conscious of the time, so that we can then give people a chance to ask any questions if they want to. So. Obviously couldn't not start with, excuse me, without kind of referencing obviously the Titanic and the Heart of the Ocean, which, as Julia said, that was really inspired by the Hope Diamond.
Yeah,
So
it's a cursed uh diamond, the Hope Diamond. It was Perry. It's got a long story, but to keep it short, there was a rumor about the Hope Diamond being cursed, and so I kind of love the fact that it was kind of used as, in the film as heart of the ocean, but the idea that Titanic sunk. So I think there's some sort of rather clever the director, I think, slightly used it as a sort of hint, was it the necklace that sunk Titanic? So yeah, no, I quite like that story. Yeah.
gotta love the power of a curse. Um, so this one, I kind of when looking at different kind of importance of and the impact of jewelry in film, I included this one because although the jewels themselves are not particularly famous, Mae West herself bought them. They are one of the earlier examples of the actress actually loaning their own jewelry in a film. But she subsequently went on to sell pretty much most of her jewelry to then support the war effort. So she was clearly quite a formidable lady. Apart from, she had some great quotes. She was also clearly very generous. But the contemporary jeweler Neil, or the brand Neil Lane, who's very kind of very much a kind of Hollywood favorite, now has a lot of these pieces, particularly Mae West pieces. So they are kind of well archived. But I thought that was quite an interesting reference and one of the earlier examples of an actress bringing her own kind of diamonds, as it were, to set. And then Gone with the Wind, not the best image, but struggled to get a better one. But Zulu, you mentioned about cameos being kind of a key part of the Victorian era, obviously much later. This is a much later part of it, but the scale of this, I'm assuming, is also not a particularly common scale for a cameo.
Yeah, that's I mean, quite a big one, but I imagine she's quite a petite person as well. So I don't know, you never know when, that's quite a big cameo. I mean, I would say,
Yes.
you
Artistic
know,
license?
sorry?
Artistic license by the production team there.
No, not really, because I think
Okay.
if it was a Victorian one, it would be completely apt and they would have worn it better. So maybe a bit of both, but not totally off.
Um, and then, so again, another not particularly well-known one, but one of the early instances of kind of Cartier's involvement in film. So this particular piece was then at the time cost around $150,000. So I should have actually done a conversion. So if anyone does a quick Google of what 150,000 US dollars in 1952 would be worth now, I think it's safe to say this would be a pretty pricey piece. And so you can imagine when we do touch on a couple of the more kind of expensive pieces, in more contemporary pieces, and the level of security involved, as you can imagine, on a film set. But it's interesting to see that really from, the kind of the golden age of Hollywood was where you really start to see some of these kind of historical brands, again, Cartier and their marketing genius, were able to show sort of bring in some showcasing of their wares on screen. And no jewelry on film can ignore the wonderful Audrey Hepburn, obviously not once but twice. Um, Again, not as well known as obviously the Breakfast at Tiffany's pieces, but the pearl choker here, particularly, I thought kind of relevant given just the value that obviously when it was sold was over 8 million US dollars. I think at that point, probably as much for the historical context and the how and where it was seen as well as the pieces itself. But again, you can see this is all around that 1950s, which seemed to be the start of where that real influence of kind of real pieces coming into film can be seen. And then staying with Audrey, can't not. Now, the reason I put this one in as well was because what was really interesting, the most iconic opening scene in Breakfast at Tiffany's and the entire kind of premise of the film and the title, the piece that she's seen wearing walking down Fifth Avenue is not actually a Tiffany's piece. It was designed by the creative director of Givenchy, who actually were the ones who designed the black dress that she's seen wearing. But the yellow diamond, the Tiffany yellow diamond, which has been reset a number of times in this particular one, it's seen it's in its ribbon necklace, was worn by Audrey Hepburn, and as I said, only the second recorded person to, but for all of the press imagery. But another kind of big statement piece, and this one I've illustrated this one a few times. It's a lot of fun, but I think this one, this is also the one that most was worn by Lady Gaga at the Oscars a few years ago, which probably people will recall. This one I was kind of I was talking to Zulu, going, I don't know, should we keep this one in here, because there aren't actually any great images of the jewelry. It's not really about the jewelry. It's about the impact of the kind of celebrity on screen, as it were, and the fact that the first time kind of starting to bring in Harry Winston's influence, another big brand, who at the time, Whoopi Goldberg thought that the character would not be wearing fake pieces, and so used her clout and influence to get Harry Winston to loan over 60 million US dollars worth of jewelry. So again, those security guards clearly had their work cut out. Which is interesting because to me, when looking at all the stills of the movie, the sets themselves were so OTT. I actually thought that you couldn't really tell, which sounds a bit harsh. And again, this is 1997, so we're not talking high def in terms of the actual sort of what we're used to now. So would it have made a difference? I mean, again, that can be argued, but clearly it kept the security guards had a job to do. But it was just quite an interesting that kind of use of a sort of some celebrity impact to bring that amount. There's probably more value in jewelry than the cost of the actual making of the movie itself, which is
Yeah,
always.
this is funny enough. When I was at Bentley and Skinner, I was talking to one of the directors there, and it was the whole thing. He made a very good point, which is, if you're an actress and you're wearing, costume jewelry, you kind of feel like you're acting. As for if you wear the real thing, you're not acting, are you? You are the real thing, and so therefore you're portraying and feeling really like the character. So I can imagine if you wear the real jewelry, you can get much more into it rather than, like
Fair
most
point.
of us have to deal with our daughter's tiaras or something, from the plastic ones at a pound.
But nothing wrong with a good frozen tiara. But speaking of anything but, this one you quite loved, didn't you, Zulu?
I think it's amazing. I mean, it's got a terrible name, these types of necklace, being a bib necklace because it's like a bib. But I think there's just something extraordinary about this design because, of course, this is not a real Edwardian tiara. A necklace because my brain's not working. But the point is, it's the inspiration, it's the creative license, and I think I love this because this is a film, obviously 2001, but you're taking the influence of an era and turning it into more of a modern thing, so exaggeration, and I think this is just wonderful. I think it's something it could have been from the era, a bit over the top, but not far off. I mean, there's been some pretty OTT jewelry, and this is just, I think, insane. And the craftsmanship and everything about it, I just think is amazing.
And even the era itself, they drew on inspiration. So it's kind of in a way kind of reimagining it is kind of what they did at the time anyway. And of course, nothing like a good price tag. It was at the time, obviously, has been significantly surpassed, but at the time it was made, was the most expensive piece of jewelry, the single piece of jewelry, not cumulative. Because looking back at obviously the Whoopi Goldberg pieces, but for a single piece, it was the most expensive piece that had been seen on screen to date, which obviously then we can say is clearly surpassed by the How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days piece that was another Harry Winston. Again, we're very much into kind of the contemporary era here, but with a yellow diamond that it was quite interesting to when kind of researching it. The security guards that were provided by Harry Winston were actually the ones that are then seen in the film because they remained in such close proximity to the necklace at all times. So again, clearly there's if your sort of security in for these fine jewelry houses, one day you never know where you're going to end up, what film set.
No,
Uh,
I was wondering about that. Is that if you get added as a credit at the end of the film, does that mean that the rate of hiring the security guards is not as much?
well, I think that's a fair point. Do they get royalties? Click acting as agent for security guards there. And then this one again coming back to Cartier, so you can see the influence of a handful of key brands. Excuse me, right starting back from like the 1950s. Cartier. Although this particular necklace, the Toussaint, which was named after the creative director Jean Toussaint from the 20th century, who actually, interestingly, side note, was the one who created the panther, the iconic Cartier panther. So she was the one who actually elevated it to become the design that we know so well. In terms of kind of Cartier's archives. But this necklace was named after her. But interestingly, the necklace itself did exist, but it doesn't anymore because it was dismantled to actually kind of make up other pieces, which is quite interesting because that's exactly what they do in the film. But the necklace itself, and you can see here, obviously that was the original, one of the original from the Cartier archives. The necklace itself on Anne Hathaway is pretty substantial, but apparently they had to make it about 20% smaller than the original, because it was originally made for a man. Which again, Zuli, you were talking about that was kind of very much taken kind of from more kind of the Indian style of jewelry. Um,
Yeah, and the pace one is in the Cartier exhibition at the moment. Which is on until mid-November, I think. So do go to see the Cartier exhibition at the V&A
if
if
you can
you
get tickets.
yeah, well, do you know what? Just be a member and just go in. It's worth it, even just for that.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, and then just the last couple before we finish up, looking at coming back to sort of jewelry that is owned and worn by the actress. Grace Kelly, famously in her last film that she made before marrying into the Monaco royal family, was high society, and that she was wearing again Cartier. Feels like it's every other slide is Cartier, unintentionally, but clearly again marketing. They so she wore her didn't want to take her engagement ring off, so it was actually written into the script, which apparently worked perfectly. This was a 10.5 carat emerald cut engagement ring from Prince Rainier, so which she then famously wore in high society. And then moving on to the more recently, for those of you who've seen it, in Crazy Rich Asians, the emerald ring. So again, for those of you who have seen it, if, you'll remember it, but for those who haven't, the scene at the very end where he's proposing, there is a significant close up, and it's one of my, speaking of bugbears, one of my biggest bugbears. If you're going to spend the money on doing a film close up, make sure you've got something that is worth being close up to. And the number of times you get close ups of things you're like, that looks fake, so just don't do it. So apparently, the character. Eleanor Young that Michelle Yeoh was portraying was meticulous, very proud, very and very status focused, but and very elegant. And so Michelle Yeoh herself actually stepped in when she saw what the production team were planning, and loaned her own piece of jewelry. So this emerald piece, which very hard to get some individual images of it, but she did then subsequently wear it to the award ceremonies afterwards, which is where we can really get most of the images. She actually loaned it herself, so the piece in the film is actually Michelle Yeoh's own emerald ring, which, given the clarity of it, there's no record of its price tag, but I imagine it's got quite a few zeros. So
Beautiful.
Stunner, stunner. And then this one actually, Zul, I'll leave it to you to finish off with. I didn't actually know this one was in the works. So
Yeah, see, this is coming. I'm not quite sure when it's coming out, but I understand it's
I think it's this
Netflix.
year. I think it's this year. Like literally.
Yeah, and it's this year. But what's rather amazing about it is that Tiffany and Co. has gone into their archives. This is not new jewelry, and they've it's in the film. But what I find fascinating about it is the book Frankenstein was written in, I think it's about my dates, about 1815, 1820s, around then. But the film is actually set around the 1850s. And why this is really important is those pieces of jewelry are 1900. So they kind of they fit. You can see she looks absolutely amazing. And there is something quite Victorian, mid-Victorian about what she's wearing. The actual pieces are incorrect for the era. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because it's all about the creative license. So if they get away with it, it's the look. And there is an element of slight correctness because the diamond necklace, for example, which is, I think, is platinum. And of course, they wouldn't have had platinum back then. But the point is, it's about the scale and the biggest. And Victorians were quite heavy and showing off. They were actually more about gold then, but the element did get diamonds then, and so it would have been more about showing off. And so there is something rather wonderful, and I love that she's wearing that necklace. I think it's absolutely extraordinary, and it's Tiffany 1900, so that's American Tiffany. So it's pretty special. And then you've got these little scarab beetles, which is again, I think that one's about 1900 as it's 1900 as well. But that was all about the Egyptian revival, which is a bit of Victorian. They did get into the whole with the tomb findings and everything. But yeah, I think it's a wonderful look. And doesn't she look amazing? I want to see the film now.
Well, the problem is we're now going to when we watch it, we're going to end up now pausing it every minute. We're not going to watch it. We're just going to purely watch it for the jewelry. But let's face it, that's what that's why I watch Downton and The Crown. It's just for the jewelry. It's everything's for the jewelry. So we did run a little bit long, couldn't help it. But I think given how the general kind of enthusiasm for all things jewelry, I think we could have done a lot worse. So excuse me, before we finish up. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, just unmute yourself. Sorry, whilst I just elegantly cough in the corner. If not, then we'll finish up, and I will. This recording will get send it out to everyone who has registered. So I know a number of people who were not able to join us, but just a really massive thank you to Zuleika for joining us. Hopefully there'll be some more things in the pipeline with Zuleika. So keep an eye out. But thank you so much. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Hope you all found it interesting, and really, well, thank you, Mona. And for those of you who I know I've got a couple of you and coming up in some design classes with me. I hope you got some inspiration. I look forward to seeing you guys in different classes or back in our next masterclass or webinar. So have a great day, evening, wherever you are in the world, and thanks for coming. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.